Right, here's my good point is, and this is a pretty simple one, but it needs to be said. People don't realise, right, that unfortunately, even if the body of work you have over your career is fantastic, it's always at a high level, it's consistent, year after year, you put in the work, ultimately, you will always in team sports be judged by team accomplishments. It is just a reality. And even if you aren't, as in even if you don't buy that as the number one priority, to be able to communicate with other people in the scene, you're going to have to be able to craft your argument around that being a factor. As in, if you think Carrigan's the best in-game leader of all time, your first port of call, whether you believe the major is the be-all end-all, is you have to now explain away why you didn't win a major. Now, here's the thing. If you're creative or if it's the right play, you might be able to do that. We obviously all did it with Simple for many years before this last major. But at the end of the day, if you want to have those discussions, and especially, like I say, if you want to get across, like you want to get plebs and really casual people who don't follow the game, if you want to bring them in on the discussion, you've got to meet certain thresholds, otherwise it's just like, an expert going on a tangent. So for me, this is the key thing. It's not just that Carrigan hadn't won a major. He'd never won a Katowice, a Cologne. He'd never won a major. So to me, I've been saying recently, I almost think there needs to be a different term. It can't just be big lands. It can't just be lands. It can't just be majors. It can't be like as broad as that. We need a concept, Chad. It has to be. I've been thinking the term should be something like prestige event. And it would be at the moment, it would be majors, Katowice and Cologne. Now, here's the thing. In the future, I'm open to the idea that like Blast World Finals could be there. But the premise for me goes like this. You have to sort of be established. The difference is I know every year if they hold a LAN Katowice and a LAN Cologne, it's essentially a major that they didn't bid for to be a major. It's going to be that good. It's going to be polished. Every year it's going to be there. And so to me, it can sit next to a major as like, I would say it counts for like 80% of a major. For the other tournaments, I'm willing to let them be in this bracket if we want to do it one day, but they have to like establish them. You've got to have a few years of it. You've got to show you can do a big stadium event. We've got to essentially add in all the things you have for a major. Because if you do that, I already noticed this before. I made this point about Simple on a lot of my talk shows. A lot of fans tunneled way too much on the fact he hadn't won the major, because in doing so, they didn't notice, Chad. He'd won all these other prestige events. He'd won Cologne a bunch of times. He'd won kind of like they actually didn't notice that essentially everything but the major, this guy had stacked in his trophy cabinet. So when you have a in-game leader as great as Carrigan, someone who, for body of work, you want him in that discussion with Glaive, with all those people that'd be in there. But the problem is, it's the lack of these prestige events that's going to be the first port of call for any hater. And they're not totally wrong. Like, you would have to essentially probably go event by event, explain why he didn't win this major, or if a player went, like, the problem is that sucks. So to me, a player as great as Carrigan, it would be a tragedy if they retired without a major or these sorts of events. That you've got to have them. And I even think the fact that he won it in this sort of weird way where only he wins these events with standings. By the way, there's another cool angle if you want to make these debates interesting. Because I've always thought the first angle you do to make the debate versus Carrigan and Glaive interesting is you just say it, but Carrigan's in an international team. Carrigan's been in many different teams. He has a different route. So to me, winning it in such a unique fashion, mate, that's worth more than a normal kind of if you're with like a team from all over your country. You did it with fucking standing in 3 different positions effectively in terms of the lineups, 3 different lineups rather, played to win it. So to me, this was like, to me, this is the IGL version of Simple winning the major. Like, he had to get some of these on his resume. He's had too good a body of work. Too many times he's been close. Like, to me, it was I found it a very satisfying narrative to see him win this tournament.
Yeah, I can see that. I think I think that it helps with the caveats of the JKS situation, right? Because we were talking about how many lands he's won with stand-ins, and for people who maybe aren't too familiar with in-game leading, this actually just attests to that ability, right? To be able to have an environment for somebody new to plug and play and use him and move him around and micromanage him. Like, I was talking to Justin about it. He's like, yeah, Carrigan he micromanaged me a lot, right? Like, to understand that and to hear that shows that he's doing his job in one of the more underappreciated roles for most fans, because they just see them anchoring the scoreboard, not the ones who are making these rounds happen. So yeah, it would have been a tragedy if Carrigan ended his career without one. But I think the thing is, for him to enter obviously he goes in the discussion when we're talking about great in-game leaders of all time, but to make sure that he's in a position where it's hard to dispute him from a top 3, or you can actually put him into a really good argument and go head to head with some of the big greats. He's still going to have to get a major, but this one right here, to see, you could see how much this meant to him, right? And I think for him that helps cement that legacy as well. So yeah, he's been such a consistent figure in Counter-Strike now for easily the last decade, right? Like all of CSGO, and then even the tail end of 1.6, right?
Yeah.
So yeah, I think this is a massive win, and I agree with that sentiment to do with the coming up with a term, because it's also a different type of Counter-Strike to be able to in-game lead and call on those events, right? So that is where the best of the best have to be exactly that. So yeah, bang on.
And I'm also even trying to think, it's a way that, for example, when we were having that discussion earlier about Gambit, if we could just say they haven't thus far performed in prestige event playoff, there we go, you've nailed it, you've got it, right? Whereas the difference is, if this was a medium-sized land, that probably wouldn't be quite enough to correct them, It's like, yeah, you have to, essentially has to be an event, you have to know the environment I'm talking about when I say it. That's why I think we needed to. What do you think, Maui, about this topic, though, the Carrigan one?
I think what Carrigan has done is arguably harder than what Glaive's done, actually, with playing with all the different rosters and it's two very different journeys for both of them, right?
It would be harder to win 4 majors with Carrigan's teams than Glaive's, not like purely in terms of like Glaive obviously did better, right?
Yeah. I mean, the thing is that Glaive did such a phenomenal job at keeping his team on top for such a long period of time that's just a completely different challenge. Whereas Carrigan has now built, I'd say, 3 rosters to championship level contenders in the last 5 years. I mean, that's super impressive. Whereas Glaive, we've seen him, succeed with essentially one core incredibly well, but then like the question can be drawn, if he went to a different team, we're seeing him with a different team now, is he even that good as an in-game leader? I mean, I obviously don't really question Glaive. Like, I don't think he's a bad in-game leader. He's like top 3 all time for sure, but it's just kind of one of those things where Carrigan's answered that question now, that he can build with not scraps, but like not even ideal conditions sometimes. Putting together rosters. Like, the thing that he did at the end of 2019, I think, is probably the most
underrated, isn't it?
Yeah, that was the most impressive with Woxic. We saw how bad Woxic fell off. Yep. I mean, like, Rops and Frozen, obviously really strong, but like...
Frozen was 17 years old at the time, by the way.
Exactly.
17 years old, he's winning like ESL Pro League. Like, people don't realise that's the get out jail free card for 2 years when he got a 17-year-old. You just go, well, he's young, isn't he? Like, give him time. Like, every NA team would do that. This guy just went and won with him.
Yeah. I mean, he won that Asia Championship, second place at Epicenter. I mean, all of those, that end of the year run was something epic. Where I basically, you basically just had to tip your hat to Carrigan. Yes. Even the way that he called in some of the games that they lost I didn't even think it was his fault. I mean, I remember vividly at Epicenter, some of the rounds that they lost just it wasn't even the strat. It was just a player fucking something up. So I mean, Carrigan, I'm glad that he got this under his belt. I don't think there's anything else that needs to be said about that. Major would probably tip the scales a little. I don't know if they would tip the scales in his favor over Glaive, but then the discussion can finally really take place.
We can have the convo, exactly, right. Yeah. I'd also say this as well. You actually caught yourself in it there, but everyone's doing it, Maui. Everyone's going. And of course, we don't really know what Glaive would be like with other players. It's like, excuse me, you've not been watching the last couple of years. I've saw him with Eschertag, Bob's. What are you talking about? Dude, these count! Because I'm going to tell you right now, I'm going to say something this is like that meme of the hard to swallow pill that no one wants to swallow, Chad. Are you ready? Here's one that's going to hurt a lot of your feelings. You know that lineup that Maui Snake just described for Mouse Sports there? Yep. Go to when that lineup was formed in Mouse Sports, and that lineup is way worse on paper than the lineup right now that Glaive has. Look at the players Glaive has. Dude, he has people who've won massive tournaments, been stars, been some of the top-rated players in the world. When he got that team that we're talking about, Woxic was like a sort of like one-man army land player who's never played with a tactical team. As I said, Frozen is a 17-year-old kid. Rops is like just getting his turn to be the man on the team, as it were, with no like Oscar, no Sonny. And then Chris J was still playing at the time. Like, that was before Chris J was considered completely washed. Like, mate... Give any other great IGL that team and then go, right, tell you what, because remember, people weren't even just like criticising them. Dude, before he had that run at the end, they were all like, but he failed with that team, didn't he? It's like, so now he's supposed to get that team online within like 3 months as well. Like, holy fuck. And then remember, this is the miracle of all miracles. He didn't even have a roster change. He just changed Rops and Frozen's position. And that alone literally made that lineup that, as I just said, no one was raving about that on paper. It became like a top 3 team in the world. It was fucking mental. So I agree. Like, the cool thing for me is, though, as I say, it's that because he did it, like, genuinely did it his own way, a totally unique path. That is what, in the end, to sum it all up, if he can get a few more big trophies, that's where you'll make the case, as I say. You'll sort of say he did it unorthodox style to the others, By the way, it's the same reason, if you want another angle. Here's the analogy. It's actually how, at the end of CSGO, you will be able to give Nico a similar discussion against Simple and Device and the others, even if he doesn't win as much. Because here's the thing. He didn't have 4 fucking Bosnian people playing with him and a whole... Like, his whole career had to play in international national teams. There's a reason, spoiler, that Chad, who's the most respected analyst, sorry, no, you're not on that level yet, mate. There's a reason why Chad himself has that running bet that like no international team being awarded. By the way, that's looking mad in danger this year. But okay, you couldn't have known that, Chad. To be fair, that was a very good bet, because I agree. Years ago, I actually went the opposite way to most fans. They saw the FaZe clan that basically almost won a major, and they were like, anyone can do it at national team. And I was like, dude, if a team with Carrigan and Nico and all the best can't do it, doesn't that show it's actually the hardest to win that way? Like, I think it's the other way. I go the other way for you guys. So yeah, I thought that whole thing was outrageous. Right, want to see more cool, funny, interesting clips based on topics from my content? Well, subscribe to this channel then, or, you know, be a pleb and don't.